My husband, Adrian Thorne, was a world-renowned pianist who despised my hands. Hands, he liked to say, are for coarse labor. The day I dared to dust his Steinway, he melted a bowl of scalding wax and, without a flicker of emotion, plunged my hands into it. "Your punishment for defiling art," he whispered over my screams. From that night on, I counted my breaths the way a prisoner counts the bars of a cell. I learned every creak in the floorboards of that mansion, which boards complained beneath a heel, which doors liked to stick when the humidity rose after rain, and how long it took for the kettle to start singing when my fingers were wrapped in ointment and gauze. I learned, above all, that mercy is quieter than cruelty, easier to doubt, and far rarer. I never touched his piano again until his birthday. He came home drunk and soft around the eyes, and for the first time in months the house felt less like an execution chamber and more like a corridor lit by candle stubs. He guided my fingers over the keys and played his first loves hymn, the one he said saved him when he was 19. Tears slid soundlessly along his jaw. "So your hands can be this soft, too?" For a small, deluded moment I believed he had let go of the past, that the ghost named Celeste had finally stepped away from the bench and left a space where he could see me. By morning, the illusion shattered. Two men I had never seen pinned me to the parquet floor while Adrian raised a hammer and, with the chilling precision of a metronome, broke my fingers one by one. He paused between each strike as if turning pages. When I collapsed, he poured himself wine and stared into the dark bowl of the glass. "Garbage must be destroyed," he said to no one. "That melody belongs to Celeste." The hospital lights were a harsh, buzzing white, thick as frost. My hands were swaddled in bandages and slung above my chest like two cautions hung in the air. The surgeon's voice was careful and weary at once. Comminuted fractures in all 10 fingers. Nerve reconstruction imperfect in 3. No heavy lifting. Avoid fine motor work. The list ran on, a ledger of subtraction. I nodded as if he were reading me the weather. "There will be wind, there will be rain, expect storms at night, brace your windows against the screaming." Adrian entered after rounds in a suit you could have used as a mirror. He didn't look at me first. He opened the blinds to draw sunlight across the bed as if I were a plant in need of correction. "What did the doctor say?" His voice was tuned to a bright, indifferent A. I said nothing. The wordless minute annoyed him more than any insult. He peeled an apple in one ribbon, a perfect spiral that reminded me of the first time I watched him practice double thirds, endless, immaculate. He lifted a slice to my mouth. I turned my head. The slice hovered in the air, then retreated without a tremor. "Don't be difficult. By now you should know what you can and cannot touch." He ate slowly, biting through sweetness as if to emphasize the point. The apple knife flashed once in a sunbeam and I flinched. His mother came later with soup and condemnation. "If he hit you, you must have done something," she said, pressing a napkin to my lower lip as if tidying crumbs of my audacity. "Better you lose a hand than he lose his future." I asked her, very calmly, whether my life had a future in any equation she understood. She clicked her tongue and adjusted the silk scarf at her throat, a gesture I had come to recognize as the prelude to pity dressed as etiquette. "He thought you were Celeste last night. As his wife, you should understand. He has been through so much." I wanted to ask, in what mathematics of grief does a man's suffering sanctify a woman's ruin? But grief in that family was a currency they spent like kings, never theirs to earn, always mine to pay. I stayed 2 weeks. Fresh fruit and expensive supplements arrived daily with type cards that said nothing at all. The driver waited outside on discharge day, hands folded like a monument to discretion. "Mr. Thorne instructed," he began. "Tell him I need time alone," I said, and shut the car door. I took a taxi that smelled of pine cleaner and wet wool and watched the city run by with my hands balanced on my knees like fragile weather. Inside the house, a pair of new, small slippers sat at the entry. A beige trench lay over the sofa arm, a coat the precise color of certain kinds of rain. A young woman with soft features dusted the piano lid with a feather duster so gently you might have thought she was blessing it. "I'm Mr. Thorne's new maintenance specialist," she said, and a blush rose in her cheeks as if she had already failed a test. "Get out," I said, not loudly but with a stillness that made dust dance and fall. She left tripping over the small slippers, and the front door snapped shut like the last page of a book I refused to keep reading. I stood at the piano I had been forbidden to touch. I placed a bandaged palm on the lid. Cold, smooth, unyielding, as if Adrian had manufactured his heart out of that same lacquer. The front door opened. He saw my hand and the room chilled another degree. "What did I tell you?" he asked, and the words cut the air into sharp triangles. I didn't turn. "Adrian," I said, "let's divorce." The silence rang. Then he laughed, the bloodless kind you'd expect to echo in marble. "Without me, you're nothing," he said, and I felt the old temptation to nod, to keep the house quiet at the cost of my soul. "I'll leave with nothing," I said. I had nothing to begin with. He gripped my chin hard enough to make my jaw click. "You will learn to be obedient." He called his lawyer and ordered a document carved out of ownership and humiliation. Mr. Davis arrived the next morning with a leather folio and a smile adjusted to look neutral. The clauses were masterpieces of control: no initiating divorce, no unnecessary contact with men, parental visits by written application, assets seized upon disobedience, including the modest house my parents now lived in, a gift before the wedding that I finally saw for what it was, a lease disguised as generosity. "If I don't sign?" I asked, my bandages like awkward clouds around my useless fingers. "You know, Mr. Thorne," Davis said, as if reciting a line from scripture, "he doesn't leave room for refusal." My phone buzzed. The voice was warm and steady in a way that made my bones ache. "Lena? It's Samuel Reed. My senior from university. The one who had once slid a pencil behind my ear and said, 'Write that chord before it runs away.' He had left for a fellowship abroad and our lives had dissolved into seasons and polite, unsent emails. 'You don't sound well,' he said. Through the window a banner flapped, International Medical Exchange Center. I turned my shoulder to block Mr. Davis from my mouth and whispered, 'Call the police. 22 Blackwood Lane. Someone is being held.' Mr. Davis lunged for the phone. I twisted away. 'Hurry,' I said, and then I couldn't say anything else because hope is as sharp as fear and slices your throat if you swallow it wrong. Sirens unstitched the quiet streets 10 minutes later. The officers were professional, not unkind, eyes darting to my hands then away as if they worried they might hurt me by looking too long. I told them what had been done to me and what had been promised. Mr. Davis told them what a misunderstanding looked like when composed in a minor key. At the station, lawyers swarmed like a cloud of impeccable insects. The charges withered. The word domestic brushed every bruise into privacy. When night fell, the polished Bentley idled at the curb. I ignored it. A white sedan eased to a stop and Samuel, hair rumpled, tie loosened, leaned across the passenger seat. "Please," he said. "Come with me." His apartment smelled faintly of limes and fresh laundry. The windows gathered late sun. "I'm a hand surgeon now," he said, almost apologetically, as if he were offering me something indecently hopeful. He unwrapped my bandages with the patience of an archivist. He did not wince. His eyes only softened then steadied as if he had climbed a ladder to a better vantage point. "A full recovery is unlikely," he said, "but not impossible. There are techniques. Tendon grafts. Nerve bridging. It will hurt." I laughed before I could stop myself. "Pain and I have an arrangement," I said. "We share a house and pretend not to know one another." He began therapy. Pain turned hours into glass and pushed against my skin from the inside. Samuel counted degrees and half degrees, celebrated a tremble of flexion like a birthday. When I dropped a plastic cup and it bounced and clattered and rolled beneath the sofa, he fetched it without commentary and set it down again. When I cried once, quietly, infuriatingly, helpless as rain, he turned on the kettle and let me stand with steam on my face and pretend it was for my sinuses. 2 degrees better than yesterday, he would say, astonished as if I had lifted a car, and I would nod as if he had handed me a map out of a country I'd thought was the whole world. No word came from Adrian. His silence was never empty. It was an animal that slept until it needed to feed. Then one evening the television, ignored in a corner, said his name. I looked up to see him in a tuxedo, the Moonlight Charitable Foundation gleaming behind him in tasteful serif. He spoke about Celeste, the brilliant prodigy, the tragic loss, and pledged to uplift underprivileged musicians in her honor. I clicked the remote off so quickly the picture collapsed like a lung. Later I opened an old email account I had stopped checking the year I married. Messages from Celeste's mother waited like a row of rusted knives. Venomous snake. Thief. You will be cursed. I typed only one line in reply, "Do you remember why Celeste really died?" My finger hovered, then pressed send. I felt cruel and clean in the same second. The internet performed its oldest ritual: a woman must burn. Anonymous voices braided themselves into a rope and tried to loop it around my neck. They called me worldless things: parasite, viper, mimicry in human form. They resurrected Celeste as a saint and me as the witch who smeared ash on her holiness. Samuel said PR and reputation management, and we can make a statement. I shook my head. It's his stage. He has already cast me. If I speak now, I only become better at the role he wrote. So you'll let them destroy you? He asked, already furious at himself for asking. No, I said. I'll let them talk. Then I'll show them a better language. When Celeste's mother called, her voice was a blade that had been sharpened on grief and then rusted with time. What are you doing? Are you trying to ruin my daughter's memory? I asked if she remembered the afternoon she tipped a bowl of ice cream over Celeste's head because she missed a cord, how the chocolate river ran down into the keys and we spent an hour with toothpicks and dishcloths saving a piano from sugar. I reminded her of the piece called Divergence, which I wrote in a dorm room where the radiator clicked like an old metronome, and of how Celeste told Adrian it was hers because her mother was listening and needed her to be exceptional every hour of the day. Silence traveled the line. When she spoke again, she sounded smaller. What do you want? A favor, I said. There's a manuscript I want to give him at the Foundation's launch. The launch would be at Grand Symphony Hall, all velvet and light and donors dressed in the metallic shades of money. Adrian would perform a posthumous masterpiece named Starlight Wish and tell the city that Celeste had written it before she died. I knew the piece like a scar. I had written it for my 18th birthday, a study in hope that refused to apologize for wanting more. I spent a month in Samuel's spare room with his mother's upright, playing until the pads of my fingers split and wept, until the blood, warm, then tacky, then brown, taught me what a price was, and how gladly I would still pay it. This will destroy you, Samuel said. It will explain me, I said. To me. I stood in the plaza outside the hall the night of the concert because I could not sit inside a room built to worship the beautiful story he had erected on my bones. The screen was enormous. Inside, the host told a love myth sweet enough to rot teeth. When Adrian sat at the piano, the camera loved him the way it always had. He began Starlight Wish, and for a moment I thought of all the times I had pictured this, my work lifted by hands that never once bothered to learn my name. At the midpoint he stopped. The second half of the score was blank. A murmur ran through the hall. A stagehand brought a folio. From Ms. Moon's mother, she said, breathless. Adrian opened the pages and the color washed out of his face. The signature was mine. Beneath it, in Celeste's handwriting, 8 words that reached into the past and snapped a locked door ajar. Adrian, I'm sorry. I stole Lena's life. The camera found my name, then his eyes, then the place in the air where the future had been hovering and suddenly wasn't. In the hush that followed, the sound of an old upright rose like a second heart beginning to beat. I sat on the bench in a simple dress with light gauze around my hands and played the ending. Not lament, resurrection. Not apology, arrival. Each crescendo laid a plank across a chasm I had lived beside so long I thought it was the whole landscape. When the final note settled, I stood and bowed and walked out through a silence larger than applause. The door sighed around me. The night air had the startled taste of snow, though it was not a winter month. Samuel stepped from the edge of the crowd and put his coat around my shoulders. It's over, he said. Yes, I said. Finally. The city digested the truth clumsily and loud. The Foundation shuddered. The tour evaporated. Sponsors withdrew their benevolence and philanthropists trained their smiles at other causes. The stock tied to his name lost its shine in a day. Reporters tried to thread microphones through my doorway. I kept it locked. The divorce moved like a stone rolling downhill. Mr. Davis brought paperwork and a new voice emptied of its earlier authority. Adrian transferred almost everything to me, including the house that had memorized my footsteps. This is what he owes you, Davis said, and looked at the floor as if the pattern of the carpet might absolve him. I signed. I kept little. I sold the mansion and bought a building with small, bright rooms and a piano that had already lived several lives and was willing to live one more. Years gathered themselves around us like a shawl. Under Samuel's patient, infuriatingly cheerful discipline, my hands learned modest tricks again, arpeggios with edges smoothed by breath, simple inventions, lullabies with missing teeth that still smiled. We opened a studio with mismatched chairs and a bulletin board full of crooked stars. Children came with parents who had day jobs and night hopes. I taught them to listen for the way a note continues speaking after you lift your finger. I taught them to leave room at the end of a phrase for light to sit down. Sometimes I heard of Adrian sponsoring a youth competition or producing a record for a pianist nobody had discovered yet. Once, across a crowded municipal hall, our eyes met. He bowed, long and without theater, and my student tugged my sleeve to ask whether the third finger should go under or over. Under, I said, and turned back to the small problem that mattered. On the studio's 5th anniversary we held a recital with lemon cake from the bakery next door and folding chairs whose legs squeaked on the floor. I played last, a small piece I had written called Rebirth, more whisper than speech. When I rose, he stood at the back holding a worn CD case with my name scuffed but legible. He waited until the parents collected coats and programs and compliments. I compiled these, he said. Your university compositions. The copyrights now bear your name. He swallowed. His voice had the rasp of a door that hasn't been opened in years. I chased a false moonlight and treated the real star like dust. I don't expect your forgiveness. Please don't abandon your music because of me. He placed the case on the table where someone had set paper cups of lemonade and walked out. I held the plastic, flimsy as a toy, and felt something in me settle like snow after the storm has used itself up. Perhaps I forgave him in that second. Perhaps I forgave only the girl who had believed love could solder a man's broken places if she stood very still and smiled while he hammered. Both are a kind of amnesty. Later, in the empty studio, the piano wore moonlight like silk. Samuel came in quietly and stood with me, our shoulders almost, not quite, touching. What are your plans? He asked. To teach. To live in peace. And me? He said, with a clumsy courage that made me ache. Can I be part of that? I didn't answer with words. I set my fingers on the keys and played the softest fragment of Rebirth, a phrase that says yes without promising perfection, that leaves space for laughter when the metronome lies and the day runs long. Then I took his hand. He startled and then his fingers closed over mine, warm and certain. We stood like that for a while, listening to the note fade and the room choose a new silence. People assume the story ended there because endings are convenient places to put down heavy things. But grief is not linear, forgiveness is not a single gesture, and rebirth is not a door you walk through once. Some mornings I still wake with a phantom weight of gauze around my hands and the memory of apple peel light moving across a hospital wall. Some afternoons a student plays a melody I wrote before my life was broken into ledger lines, and for a breath I am 18 again, cocky and tender, sure that the future is a room that will make space for me if I knock politely. Then a child misses a note and grimaces and I teach them how to smile at a mistake until it smiles back. Celeste's mother sent me one letter the winter after the recital. It was not an apology. It was worse, which is to say better, a description of the day she found her daughter on the floor beside the Steinway, an account of the call she made to Adrian, a confession of the moment she decided I was easier to hate than grief was to hold. She did not ask me to write back. I did anyway. I wrote about the drafty dorm room where divergence began as a joke and became a promise. I wrote about the cheap headphones that made the bass sound like someone knocking on wood 2 rooms away. I wrote that love is not a reliable conductor, sometimes it shunts through the wrong wire and lights up the part of you that was supposed to stay dark. I folded the letter and sent it. Months later she returned the original manuscript of Divergence, foxed and softened at the creases. No note. No explanation. A ledger closed. The city learned a new story. Not about a great man felled by a lie, but about a woman who made a language and had it taken from her and then took it back without shouting. My name appeared in smaller fonts now but on the correct lines. Music students cited Starlight Wish as a case study in authorship and ethics. Professors sent me nervous emails asking if I might Skype into classes. I did, sometimes. I told them the same thing I told my 9-year-olds, a melody remembers who first breathed it, even if the room forgets. Once, years later, I passed a concert hall and heard someone practicing in the dark auditorium, the way professionals like to rehearse, when the red velvet is empty and the air is held very still. The pianist was careful, conscientious, a little too obedient to the page. I sat in the back row and listened to the way the notes touched and lifted like birds testing wind. After a while the pianist stopped and turned around. He was young, all angles and hunger, and he flushed when he saw me as if he had been caught sneaking dessert. "I can't find the ending," he said. "I don't know how to land it." "Landings are overrated," I said. "Try leaving the last measure open. Give the audience a place to walk in after you." He tried it, and it worked, and he smiled in that startled, private way of someone discovering the door they were pushing was a pull. On the anniversary of the foundation scandal, a journalist called to ask whether I felt vindicated. I told her vindication is cold food, you can live on it but it will not warm you. What warms you is the small hand of a child tugging you toward a piano because she has made 4 notes fit together for the first time in her life and wants you to hear how the world opens when you press the right key at the right time. What warms you is a man who boils water for tea as if it were the most heroic thing he can do for you that minute, and sometimes it is. If Adrian plays at all now, I do not know. I imagine he does, alone, without camera or legend. I imagine he has learned the loneliness of perfection, the way it cannot love you back. I do not wish him misery. Misery makes monsters of the best of us. I wish him ordinary days and music that is only music, not religion. I wish him the grace of a note that does not tremble. My hands will never be what they were. They are knotted maps of places I didn't mean to travel, with pale rivers of scar that shift when I open a jar or zip a child's coat. But they play enough. They play badly, beautifully, adequately, bravely, whatever the day asks. They hold a pen. They hold Samuel's hand across a grocery aisle while we argue over brands of tea. They hold the faces of students who cry when something important finally clicks. They hold, and are held, and that is more than I used to believe was possible. If you were to ask me now what Starlight Wish sounds like, I would tell you it does not sound like what you think. It is less about stars than about a person standing in a room with no windows and deciding to make a window with their breath. It is less about wishing than about choosing. It ends, when I play it anyway, without ending. It leaves a space where another life can begin.